Tall Tales. The Nymph Symphony.
Chapters.
Chapter 10. Banquet. I stared towards two clay jugs centered around multiple smaller mugs of half-filled breakfast juice and water. The very first thing I saw being those glasses all ringed around a bowl of uneaten oats balancing on the corner of my bedside table. My right leg was dangling over the edge of my silk hammock as I rocked myself side to side, half asleep but slowly waking up to the sound of other servants frantically moving about in our shared quarters. They made no effort to limit their noise as they tended to their duties all around me. I didn't care too much though, not enough to ask them to be quieter. I was fairly used to the noise, and they were all good friends of mine, many of them voluntarily doing my own duties in exchange for a detailed narration of last night's ridiculous exploits. "It's about time you woke up, dear," Tamara said with a certain giddiness to her tone. She was a lifelong employee of the Crown, a frail older colleague of mine, who was currently folding up towels beside the door in a happy and cheerful rush. She had a washcloth tied over her head like a bandana, covering her gray and white-colored hair. She was the only servant to ever clean our quarters, and also happened to be the only maid who never tried to dress up and be fancy. All the other younger maids were always wearing the most vibrant colored skirts and dresses, in the hopes they could catch some noble's curious eyes. "You better hurry up now," Tamara then said to me with a smile. "You've already missed so much." She was talking to me and another girl named Jade, a girl who was crouching over her bunk, just adjacent to my own. She had long blonde beautiful locks and green eyes not so different from the gemstone her name suggested, but being just as precious as a green stone and ring she always talked about wanting. She was rummaging through her things in a melodramatic fluster, trying to find something appropriate to wear. "What have I missed?" I asked Tamara, rubbing my eyes. "Oh, not much. Not much. Just the prince about to be anointed into the vanguard," she charismatically snapped, throwing a black bartender's apron at me as she said it. "The queen announced it so suddenly, but I didn't want to wake you up until you'd gotten a small bit of sleep first," she explained. "But now that you know, why are you still in bed?" she joked. Ecstatic, just as she'd anticipated, I dropped from the hammock and began ransacking my footlocker, plugging out everything I owned until I reached the drawer's flat wooden bottom, where I kept the most stylish dress I owned safely tucked away. A thin silk black and blue dyed dress made to mimic the raw night sky. Anara had given it to me on my birthday. It had a whole galaxy of dark blue, gray, and white colors attached to it, yet looked as simple as a waveless ocean that mirrored the long unseen stars of midnight. It had been made with dyes so costly, I was fairly certain even someone as wealthy as my princess might have had to steal it for me. Never, until today, had I even dared wear it outside. But a prince's inauguration was a perfect event to put it on. It was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for everyone involved. Festivals and ceremonies were times of great celebration in the castle, where us commoners could dress up and mingle with high society. As a bartender or waitress, of course, but it was still a privilege, as we were allowed to meet and greet all the distinguished members of the capital. "So will today be the day?" Tamara cried excitedly to Jade, referring to her insatiable lust to win the heart of a nobleman or knight. "Not in any of these," she moaned, still throwing her clothes to the floor with a pout. To many of the young maids here, Parliament steps were a red carpet to all their dreams coming true. The place where they might meet a nobleman from another land, who would take them away from the kitchens and the laundries and live a life of love, marriage, and wealth. At least that was a generalized fantasy. "And what of you? Will you be looking for love today?" Tamara asked me, staring down at me while leaning herself on a broomstick, bending the bristles against the dormitory's floorboards as she held it like a highly distinguished dance partner. I was still seated on the floor, examining my dress's silk fabric for any careless rips or creases. "Me? Well, yes, dear. Who else?" "No, I'm still waiting," I replied, not one to fantasize about a noble rescuing me anytime soon. "Waiting for what?" Jade questioned. "Old age?" Tamara teased in a friendly manner, with her and Jade giggling. "No," I giggled too. "I don't really know. I guess for the one out there who's been waiting for me," I added optimistically, leaving the girls to their banter while I went somewhere quieter to get dressed. Maids were rushing from chamber to chamber, flustered by the little time they had left to finish their looks before having to leave for work, all lined up by the only mirror we had in the quarters. I folded my apron into my hand once dressed and ran out of the palace doors, heading towards the royal courts near the center of town, passing the deserted streets. I skipped up the sandstone steps towards Parliament House and entered the courtroom foyer as quick as I could. The crowd inside was already huge, though, and being at the back of the room, I had to jump up and down from that back row just to catch small snippets of the full scene unfolding. The king was sitting on the throne, with all the prestigious nobles lined on either side of him. Arlo and Ebony knelt before the few small steps leading up to Helios's throne chair, while Akoni, Camilla, and Anera stood nearby, at the very front of the crowd. I had missed all the vows and speeches, but had made it just in time for the knighting. Helios was standing up as he touched the tip of a ceremonial sword to Arlo's right shoulder plate, and then moving it to his left. He did the same with Ebony. They rose, sending the crowd into a clapping frenzy, welcoming them into the First Legion as members of Camilla's vanguard, the two of them replacing Radamant and Aris. I put my apron on and entered the back area, happily beginning work as I found an optimistic charisma that came from all I'd done yesterday. I handed out beverages to the knights and noblemen as they laughed and enjoyed the after-party celebrations. An orchestra played an upbeat groove, while chatting dignitaries conjugated around the vast courtroom's walls and up on the second-story balconies, leaving most of this main foyer as a dance floor for the younger noblemen and women. I felt a sadness creep over me at the thought that Radamant lived for these kind of events and would normally have made a fool out of himself already, being the wild card that usually turned any dull celebration into a true party. But that was something that was going to have to stay in the past, due to him being gone. "I never got a chance to thank you," said a familiar voice to me from behind. I turned around, expecting to find the prince, but happy to see it was Akoni standing behind me instead. He grabbed my hand and ushered me towards the dance floor, where he took the empty tray I held and flung it away, much like his best friend Arlo would do, making the point that I had just as much reason to enjoy this party as anyone else here. He put one hand on my back and clasped his other hand with mine, the two of us spiraling and stepping around awkwardly in a fun but failed waltz. He was actually a rather talented dancer, to my surprise, formal events being just one of his greatest specialties as he stood straight and proper. "Since when do you dance?" I asked him. "I don't. But don't we all just pretend?" he grinned, dipping me as if we suddenly switched into a tango class instead. If only he could be this charming with Anara, I thought. And she was right there, only half a dance floor away, socializing with some of her more prestigious friends. She smiled at Akoni, making him blush and putting an end to his giddiness almost as quickly as it had started. The two of us retreating from the dance floor, heading back towards the doorway exit, away from the crowd. This event unfolded so quickly. Doesn't the council usually take a couple of days to come to decisions like this? Could it not have waited at least a proper day's sleep? I asked Akoni as we then walked out towards the courtside gardens together. "Milena says the tides are turning," he replied. "That desperate times lay ahead of us," he stated to me, seeming a little more flustered and distracted than usual. "I wanted to talk to you because I'm leaving tomorrow with Arlo. Milena has reconsidered my request to find a new crystal to replace the old one inside the Sun Spire," he said quietly, trying to appear as discreet as possible. "Wow," I replied, genuinely impressed. "But you've been making that pitch for years. Why has she agreed to it now?" He shrugged and didn't answer, in case the nobles we were walking past might overhear. "So that's why Arlo was so quickly promoted, I rephrased. "And where have you chosen to go for such a mining expedition?" I pried, once we were finally far enough away from the crowd to speak freely. "The Crystal Caverns," he answered calmly, taking a sip from the glass he'd taken from the bar under the balcony by the gardens. "What?" I exclaimed, loud enough to attract the attention of a few nearby nobles, having to remind it to lower my voice and whisper as he stared plainly back at me. "Akoni, that's not in the borderlands. You know how dangerous it is out there." He did know, but even still, he didn't respond. Instead, he led me further outside, away from prying ears. "Yeah, I know," he then said, leaning towards me. "Milena finally approved my proposal to go there," he whispered quietly as we entered the fresh tropical greenery of the small botanical gardens. "Why do you need to go all the way out there?" And why would she approve you two to go without anyone else to back you up? I whispered, taking us off the open grass and sitting on one of the many wooden benches so we could have a deeper and more serious conversation. Don't share any of this, but things are worse than what we want the nobles here to believe, he elaborated, waiting a second only to continue speaking in an even quieter voice. The Sunspire isn't just damaged anymore, Kaya. It's collapsing. Cracks are growing faster than Helios can mend them. At this rate, he fears it's just a matter of weeks before it breaks completely. It was all beginning to make sense now, why the army didn't initially give aid to Ambervale, and why all resources were being kept in the castle. And Melina still condones this? Sending her heir and only son into the Badlands without any additional escorts? The more we bring, the greater the risk of being spotted, he explained. I get that, but still. It's strange, I know. I guess no one fears the darkness quite like she does. I mean, why else would she take the old man Helios as her husband? Akoni joked. But you're right. She was reluctant, to say the least. Unfortunately for her, Arlo is the only one strong enough to carry the crystal without a wagon, Akoni explained to me, giving me a moment to let everything he said sink in. I sat in silence, contemplating what exactly I wanted to ask. I said need to get back to work soon. So why the caverns? I asked. What's so special about going there? I added, trying to refrain myself from any idle chat and deciding to only ask the most important questions that I could think of at the time. The gold in the Sunspire can be easily mended with the gold Arlo said you and him found in the farmhouse. But the center crystal cannot simply be fixed once cracked. It has to be replaced altogether. And there's only one place where we can find one that large again. The place where your father found the last one, I said, answering my own question, smiling in the realization of its significance. Clever, I then stated to him. Promise me you'll take care of each other, I said, almost wishing deep down inside I could go with them. Of course, Kaya, Akoni vowed. I don't want to die any less than you want me to die, he muttered humorously. I stood up, ready to return to work. Wait, Akoni said to me in stall, pulling me back down beside him. I almost forgot to give you what I came here for, he said, rummaging around in his vest pocket and pulling out something small and glowing. A beautiful ornament with flawless silver links, cradling a bright iridescent crescent moon pendant, dimly glowing like the rare moon itself. Back when Arlo was trying to teach me to fight, he mentioned with a grin, no doubt remembering how terrible those days were, before he found his calling as a field scientist. He told me one thing I've never forgotten. He said that some might prefer a stick over a sword, or an arrow over a bolt, but all weapons are just extensions of whatever part of their body they excel with the most, he explained while I stared, mesmerized at the sheer aesthetic brilliance of this gift I could only assume he was about to give me. But not all weapons are swords or sticks, he then stated amusingly. You and I use our eyes and minds to survive. And after all that you did for me last night, I think it's time you got something to go with that warrior spirit, he said, smiling as he placed the pendant into my two-cupped hands, shadows growing behind my hands and at the back of my fingertips, my two hands almost trembling as I struggled to contain my teeming excitement as I began to unlink the necklace's chain, and, with Akoni's help, carefully put it around my neck to forever sit. It was a present so pretty and heartfelt that I could do nothing but sit there in silent admiration of it, staring at its twinkling and mild brilliance. It's a broken shard from the Sunspire, he explained. That crystal won't dim for at least a few 100 years or so, long enough to keep your shadows alive and strong. Should night ever come at you again, and you need to conjure a quick shield or sword, he said. I had kept this fragment to remember my father, Akoni then added, with a tone of guilty shame to his voice as he said it. But now that I know he's still alive, I don't really need it anymore. Not when it's far more useful and beautiful on you. Words couldn't explain how truly appreciative I was of his sentiment. But it came with sad tidings, as I realized what a big deal it was for Akoni to let it go, choosing to relinquish all idealistic hope of his father's redemption. Akoni, I love it so much. Thank you, I praised, hugging him, wishing to add that I was sorry about how everything had worked out, but deciding to avoid the topic of his father altogether, knowing it would only bring him further discomfort to mention it out loud. Akoni merely looked at me and nodded. Well, I should go back. One last hug for the road, he then said with a smirk, preparing himself for a long afternoon of preparation and packing. We hugged, and just like that, he took his exit, leaving me to tuck the necklace under my work apron and dress before heading back towards the courtroom. I felt so bad for Oconee and what he was going through. He'd been teased his whole life about his father being crazy, only to find out firsthand that it was all true. It made me feel even worse to think he'd given up this precious gift, a piece of his father, to me, but I couldn't help but be riddled with my own selfish happiness about receiving it, a gift so small and yet life-changing. It could open up new doors that I'd never imagined in my wildest dreams were possible. With a light source by my side, even in pure darkness, I would never go without a shadow again. I could be a builder or a warrior, anything my heart desired. Through discipline and training, who knew what constructs my shadows would be capable of, how dense and solid I could make the mist become if I were given a chance to fine-tune my skill set. But firstly, before considering my bright future, I needed to do one last thing. Find Arlo and properly thank him for all he'd done for me, and to congratulate him on his well-earned promotion, and make sure he took care of Oconee, especially with everything he was going through. I re-entered the courtroom, passing Melina, who smiled mischievously at me as she walked by. I wondered if she was smiling about all the things she was going to punish me with when we were finally away from the safety of the public's eye. I suddenly started to feel a bit sick, and when I turned the corner, my shadow appeared in front of me, blocking my path. For some reason, it, or I suppose I, didn't want me to take another step. Curiosity pushed me through the shadow, waving my hands to disperse it completely. There, on the other side of the room, stood Arlo beside Ebony and her parents, suddenly starting to kneel down with a nervous but enthusiastic smile. Ebony gasped, pressing both hands to her mouth. I froze, feeling paralyzed. I didn't understand what was happening. All I could feel was my own heart pounding uncontrollably. I started to feel nauseous, like I was going to need my shadow back just to help me stand. The prince got back up. My eyes were glued to the scene as I watched Ebony stare at a sparkly rock on her finger. Her and Arlo then kissed, while the crowd burst into clapping and cheers. Anara, who came up to congratulate Ebony's father, looked at me with concern, just as shocked with what she was witnessing as I was. She faked a smile and then congratulated Ebony as well. I couldn't breathe. I spun around, bumping into another waitress coming in to get a closer look, forcing me to push my way through the swarming crowd. Turning the corner once again, I returned to the empty hallway that led to the gardens and rested against the wall. What was wrong with me? My whole body was shaking and I felt numb as my mind tried to process what I'd just seen. I was suddenly struck by a burst of clarity as I finally came to terms with the most ugly truth of all. I think I'm in love with Arlo.